My family laughed when I told them I was getting divorced. My brother actually raised his glass and said, "Finally, Ethan is officially a failure." My mother told me I had ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. My father said I should be ashamed for throwing away a comfortable life. Even my sister-in-law smiled and whispered that maybe my wife had finally realized what kind of man I was. They didn't ask why I was leaving. They didn't ask what had happened behind closed doors. They just assumed I had lost. What they didn't know was that I had spent 2 years protecting my family's reputation while my marriage slowly destroyed me. I had stayed silent about what my wife had done because I didn't want my parents, my brother, or anyone else to know the truth. Then, on the night of my divorce party, yes, my own family actually turned my divorce into a joke. I received a phone call that changed everything. The truth came out, and suddenly nobody was laughing. Because the person they had been calling a failure wasn't the person who had destroyed the marriage. I was the one who had been protecting everyone else. My name is Ethan Carter, and for most of my adult life, my family believed I had everything figured out. I had a good job, a nice house, a beautiful wife, and what everyone considered a perfect marriage. My wife, Lauren, was 32 when we got married. She was intelligent, ambitious, and incredibly charming around other people. My parents loved her immediately. My mother used to tell everyone, "Ethan married above himself." I laughed whenever she said it. At the time, I thought it was harmless. My father liked Lauren because she knew how to talk to successful people. My brother Jason liked her because she never challenged him. My younger sister, Emily, thought Lauren was sophisticated. Everyone loved her. And I loved her too. At least I thought I did. We had been married for almost 7 years when everything began changing. At first it was small. Lauren started coming home later. She became protective of her phone. She stopped talking about her day. Whenever I asked what was wrong, she said she was tired. I didn't push. Then she started criticizing me. My job wasn't impressive enough. Our house wasn't big enough. I wasn't ambitious enough. She said I had become boring. One night, I came home from work and found her sitting at the kitchen table. She looked furious. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "Do you ever feel embarrassed about your life?" I stared at her. "What?" She repeated it. "Do you ever feel like you've settled?" I sat down. I asked, "What exactly are you talking about?" She said, "Look at Jason." I almost laughed. Jason was my older brother. He had recently become a partner at a real estate investment firm. He drove a luxury SUV. He traveled constantly. My father bragged about him every chance he got. Lauren continued, "Jason is building something." I said, "Good for him." She looked at me. "That's all you have to say." I asked, "What do you want me to say?" She stood. "I want you to want more." I said, "I do." She laughed. "No, Ethan, you want comfort." That conversation stayed in my head for weeks. I started working longer hours. I accepted extra responsibilities. I started saving more. I thought maybe Lauren was right. Maybe I had become complacent. Then one Saturday morning, I found a hotel receipt in her purse. I wasn't searching for anything. She had left her purse on the kitchen counter. The receipt was visible. The hotel was in downtown Charlotte. 2 nights. A room for 2 people. I asked her about it. She immediately became defensive. "Why are you going through my things?" I didn't. "You were looking in my purse." I wasn't. She grabbed the receipt. "It was a work event." I said, "You stayed there 2 nights." "Yes." "With who?" She stared at me. "Why does it matter?" I felt something inside me change. "Because you're my wife." She rolled her eyes. "Don't start." I didn't. I wanted to believe her. So I did. For another 6 months. Then I found messages. Not explicit messages. That would have been easier. They were worse. They were affectionate, private, familiar. The kind of messages you don't send to a coworker. The man's name was Daniel. I knew him. He was one of Lauren's clients. I confronted her. She denied everything. Then she admitted they had become close. Then she admitted they had kissed. Then she admitted they had been seeing each other. I asked how long. She said, "It doesn't matter." I said, "How long?" She looked at the floor. "Almost 2 years." 2 years. I felt like the room disappeared. 2 years of lies. 2 years of pretending. 2 years of coming home and believing my wife was waiting for me. I asked her why. She said, "You weren't enough." Those 4 words destroyed me. I slept in the guest room that night. The next morning, I called an attorney. I didn't tell my family. Not yet. I didn't want them to know. Because I knew exactly what would happen. My mother would ask what I had done wrong. My father would tell me to save the marriage. Jason would somehow turn it into a competition. And Lauren would become the victim. So I stayed quiet. I filed for divorce privately. I told Lauren we were done. She cried. She apologized. She promised it was over with Daniel. I didn't believe her. Then she said something that shocked me. "If you tell your family, I'll make sure they know everything." I asked, "Everything about what?" She didn't answer. That was the first time I realized there was something else. Something bigger. Something Lauren was afraid of. I hired a private investigator. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed to know what I was dealing with. 3 weeks later, the investigator gave me a file. I opened it at my attorney's office. The first few pages were about Daniel. Then I found something unexpected. Lauren had been transferring money from our joint accounts. Large amounts. Not to Daniel. To another account. An account connected to a company called L&M Consulting. I didn't recognize the name. My attorney did. He said, "This company is connected to your father." I stared at him. What? He explained that L&M Consulting had been doing financial consulting for Carter Properties, my father's real estate company. But there was more. The money wasn't simply disappearing. It was being routed through several accounts. And some of those transfers were connected to Jason. I couldn't understand it. I called my investigator. He found more. Lauren and Jason had been communicating. Not romantically. Financially. They had been discussing a real estate investment. Jason had used money from my family business. Lauren had been helping him move some of it. And my name was attached to one of the accounts. I stared at the documents. Someone had used my identity. My signature appeared on paperwork I had never seen. I asked my attorney, "What is this?" He said, "Someone is setting you up." My stomach dropped. The divorce wasn't the only problem. Someone had been preparing to blame me for financial misconduct. And the person at the center of it was my wife. I confronted Lauren. I put the documents on the table. She looked at them. Then she started crying. I asked, "What did you do?" She said, "I didn't have a choice." I said, "You always have a choice." She told me everything. Jason had been losing money. A lot of money. He had invested heavily in a development project that collapsed. He owed investors millions. My father had secretly used company funds to cover some of the losses. Lauren had helped move money between accounts. She had also helped create documents that made it appear as if I had approved several transfers. I couldn't believe it. I asked, "Why would you do this?" She said, "Jason promised he would protect me." I stared at her. "You cheated on me." She cried. "I know." You stole from me. I know. You helped frame me. She looked down. I was scared. I said, you should be. Then she said something that changed everything. Your father knew. I froze. What? Your father knew about the money. I asked, did he know about the fake documents? She didn't answer. Lauren. She started crying. He knew enough. I left. I drove to my parents' house. My father was in his office. Jason was there. They were both talking when I walked in. My father looked surprised. Ethan. I put a folder on his desk. What is this? He looked at the documents. Jason immediately became nervous. I said, you used my name. My father said, calm down. I laughed. Don't tell me to calm down. Jason stood. This isn't what you think. I looked at him. Then explain it. He couldn't. My father stepped in. Jason made some bad investments. I said, so you stole money from the company. My father became angry. We were trying to protect the family. I said, by making me responsible for it. He didn't answer. Then I said, Lauren told me everything. Jason's face changed. My father sat down. I realized then that they had known. They had known about the money. They had known about the fake paperwork. And they had been hoping the divorce would give them a convenient scapegoat. Me. My father finally said, it was never supposed to go this far. I stared at him. My marriage. He looked down. The financial situation. I said, you let my wife betray me so you could protect Jason. Jason shouted, I didn't ask them to do that. I looked at him. You benefited from it. He became silent. My father said, you don't understand the pressure I was under. I laughed. No, you don't understand what you've done. Then I left. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I gave everything to my attorney. The next few months became a legal nightmare. My divorce proceedings were already underway. Now there were financial investigations. My father's company was audited. Jason's investment records were examined. Lauren's accounts were subpoenaed. And the truth started spreading. My family couldn't hide it anymore. But before the truth came out publicly, my parents did something unbelievable. They invited me to dinner. I almost refused. But I went. The entire family was there. My parents, Jason, Emily. Lauren wasn't invited. I sat down. My father poured himself a drink. Then Jason raised his glass. He said, well, Ethan is finally getting divorced. Everyone looked at him. He smiled. Maybe now he'll have time to figure out what he's doing with his life. My mother laughed. I stared at her. She actually laughed. Then Emily smiled awkwardly. My father shook his head. It's a shame. Jason said, at least Lauren gets a fresh start. I looked around the table. Nobody asked me why the marriage ended. Nobody asked what happened. They had already decided. I was the failure. Again. Jason raised his glass. To new beginnings. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I stood. My father asked, where are you going? I said, home. Jason laughed. You're home. You're losing half of it. I looked at him. No. He stopped laughing. I said, I'm not losing anything. Then I walked out. The next morning, my attorney called. Ethan, we have a problem. I asked, what? He said, your family is trying to settle. Why? Because the financial investigation found more. I sat down. What did they find? He said, the company accounts are significantly worse than we thought. Jason had not simply lost money. He had nearly destroyed the family business. My father had covered the losses for years. Millions had disappeared. And now the creditors were coming. My attorney asked me to review the documents. I did. Then I saw something. A list of properties owned by Carter Properties. There were dozens. Commercial buildings, warehouses, apartment complexes, land. And one property stood out. A large commercial building in downtown Charlotte. I knew it. My father had bought it 20 years earlier. The property was worth millions. And because of the debt, it was about to be sold. I asked my attorney, what happens if someone buys the debt? He looked at me. That person could potentially control the property. I smiled. Find out who owns the debt. He did. A private investment group. I asked who owned the investment group. My attorney looked at me. You. I stared at him. Years earlier, I had quietly started investing. Small amounts at first. Then larger. I had built an investment company under a different name. Nobody in my family knew. My attorney said, you already own part of the debt portfolio. I looked at the documents. Then I realized something. My family had spent years thinking I was financially weak. They didn't know I had been building wealth quietly. While they were showing off expensive cars and fancy houses, I had been investing. While Jason was borrowing money, I was buying assets. While my father was trying to protect his favorite son, I was building a financial foundation. And now that foundation was about to change everything. I acquired the remaining debt. Then I acquired another property. Then another. I didn't announce anything. I let the legal process continue. Eventually, my father's company couldn't meet its obligations. The business was forced to restructure. Jason had to surrender control of several investments. My father had to sell properties. And the company that had once been the pride of our family was suddenly vulnerable. Then I made my move. I offered to acquire the remaining assets. My father refused. He said, I'd rather lose everything. I told him, that's your choice. Then I gave him one final option. He could accept my offer and preserve the jobs of his employees. Or he could reject it and watch the company collapse. He had no idea who was making the offer. The purchase was being made through my investment company. Until the final meeting. My father walked into the conference room. Jason was beside him. Their attorney was there. My attorney stood at the other end of the table. Then I walked in. My father froze. Jason stared at me. My father whispered, Ethan. I sat down. Hello, Dad. Jason looked at the documents. Then he looked at me. You. I nodded. My father couldn't speak. I said, you wanted to know what I was doing with my life. Nobody moved. I continued. I've been building. Jason's face turned red. You're buying the company. I said, the assets. My father stared at me. You planned this? No. He looked confused. I continued. You destroyed the company yourselves. Jason said, you can't do this. I looked at him. Why? Because we're family. I almost laughed. That's what you told me when you were stealing from me. He went silent. My father looked at me. Why? I said, because the assets are valuable. He knew that wasn't the whole answer. I continued. But I also want to protect the employees. My father looked down. You're taking everything. I said, no. I pushed the documents toward him. I'm giving you an opportunity to walk away without destroying everyone who works for you. He looked at the offer. It was fair. More than fair. I wasn't trying to bankrupt him. I wasn't trying to punish the employees. I simply wanted control of the assets. My father looked at me. You're really doing this? I said, yes. Jason stood. You've been waiting for this. I looked at him. No. I paused. I've been waiting for you to stop hurting people. He sat down. The deal closed several weeks later. I acquired the assets. I kept most of the employees. I restructured the company. I removed Jason from management. My father retired. The business survived. But my family didn't recover immediately. The divorce became public within our social circle. Then the financial investigation became public. People learned what had happened. They learned that Lauren had cheated. They learned about the money. They learned about the fake documents. They learned that my father and Jason had tried to protect the business by making me responsible. Suddenly, the story changed. I wasn't the man who destroyed his marriage. I was the man who had been betrayed. My mother called me. She was crying. Ethan, I'm sorry. I asked, for what? For laughing. I remembered that dinner. The glasses. The jokes. Jason's smile. My mother's laughter. I said, you didn't know the truth. She replied, we should have asked. That was the answer. They should have asked. My father eventually called too. He said, I owe you an apology. I said, yes. He sighed. I failed you. I didn't argue. He continued. I spent my whole life protecting Jason. I said, I know. And I destroyed my relationship with you. I said nothing. Then he asked, can you forgive me? I thought about it. I can forgive you. He sounded relieved. But that doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. He understood. Jason was harder. He blamed me for everything. He said I had planned the acquisition just to humiliate him. I told him the truth. If I wanted to humiliate you, I would have made sure everyone knew what you did before the deal. He became quiet. You protected me. I said, I protected the employees. He didn't answer. Then he asked, why? I said, because I'm not you. That was the end of the conversation. As for Lauren, the divorce was finalized. She lost the financial claims she had expected. The evidence made it impossible for her to maintain the story she had created. Daniel disappeared from her life. I never asked what happened to them. I didn't care. I moved out of our old house. I bought a smaller place near the lake. I started running again. I traveled. I spent time with people who didn't know my family. And slowly, I started becoming myself again. 1 year after the divorce, I received an invitation. My family was hosting Thanksgiving. I almost didn't go. Then I decided to. When I arrived, the house felt different. My father was quieter. My mother hugged me. Jason avoided eye contact. We sat down for dinner. Nobody made jokes. Nobody raised a glass. Finally, my father stood. He looked at me. I want to say something. I waited. He said, last year we laughed at Ethan. Everyone became silent. My father continued. We thought his divorce proved he had failed. He looked at me. We were wrong. My mother started crying. My father said, we didn't know the truth. I thought about correcting him. But I didn't. He continued. The truth was that Ethan was the person protecting this family, while we were protecting the wrong people. Jason looked down. My father said, I'm ashamed of that. Nobody spoke. Then he raised his glass. Not as a joke this time. To Ethan. I looked at him. He said, for surviving what we did to him. I didn't raise my glass immediately. Then I did. But I wasn't celebrating. I was accepting the apology. There is a strange thing, about being betrayed by your own family. You expect the truth to feel like revenge. You imagine the moment when everyone finally discovers what happened. You imagine their shocked faces, their apologies, their regret. And when it finally happens, you realize something. It doesn't fix what happened. The truth doesn't give you back the years. It doesn't erase the nights you spent wondering why you weren't enough. It doesn't erase the humiliation. It doesn't erase the betrayal. But it does something important. It gives you your name back. For months, my family had called me a failure. They thought I had lost my wife, my house, my future, my dignity. But I hadn't lost those things. I had lost a marriage that was built on lies. I had lost a house filled with memories that had become painful. And I had lost the approval of people who never bothered to ask what happened. What I gained was far more valuable. I gained the truth. I gained freedom. I gained control over my life. And I discovered that I was capable of building something without anyone's permission. The company I acquired eventually became profitable again. I expanded it. I modernized it. I turned it into something my family never imagined. Employees who had once feared losing their jobs stayed. Some became managers. Some became partners. And every year, I remembered the reason I had bought the company. Not revenge. Responsibility. One afternoon, I stood inside the old office that had belonged to my father. The same office where I had once begged him to believe me. Now I owned the building. My father walked in. He looked around. Then he smiled sadly. "It's strange seeing you here." I asked why. He said, "Because I always thought this room would belong to Jason." I smiled. "I know." He looked at me. "Does it bother you?" "What?" "That you ended up with everything." I thought about it. "No." He looked surprised. "Why?" I said, "Because I didn't take everything." He waited. "I built something else." My father nodded. Then he said, "Your divorce saved you." I looked at him. He continued, "If you had stayed married, you might never have discovered what was happening." I nodded. "Maybe." He looked at me. "Do you regret it?" I thought about Lauren. The lies. The betrayal. The pain. Then I thought about the life I had now. "No." My father smiled. "I wouldn't either." After he left, I stood by the window. I thought about the night my family laughed at my divorce. I remembered Jason raising his glass. I remembered my mother laughing. I remembered my father calling me a failure. And I remembered how alone I felt. Back then, I thought they had seen the worst version of me. They hadn't. They had seen the version of me who was finally walking away. The version who was finally done protecting people who didn't protect him. The version who was finally choosing himself. My family laughed at my divorce. They thought I had lost everything. Then they learned the truth. The truth was that my marriage had been built on betrayal. The truth was that my wife had been lying for years. The truth was that my brother had been using money that wasn't his. The truth was that my father had helped hide it. And the biggest truth of all, I wasn't the failure. I was the person who survived them. I could have destroyed my family after everything they did. I could have exposed every secret. I could have watched them lose everything. But I chose something else. I rebuilt. I protected innocent employees. I bought the assets. I created a future that didn't depend on their approval. And eventually, I forgave them. Not because what they did was okay. Because I refused to let their mistakes control the rest of my life. People sometimes think revenge means making someone suffer the way they made you suffer. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes revenge is simply walking away from the people who told you that you weren't enough and becoming everything they said you could never be. My family laughed at my divorce. Then they learned the truth. And when the truth finally came out, I didn't laugh back. I didn't need to. Because I had already won the moment, I stopped trying to prove them wrong. I had lost a marriage, but I found myself. I lost my family's approval, but I found my own voice. I lost the life I thought I wanted, and somehow I built a better one. So if there's one thing I learned from that painful chapter, it's this. Never let people who don't know your story decide what your ending looks like. My family thought my divorce was the end of my life. It wasn't. It was the beginning of the life I should have been living all along.